Master Course Online. Today, I'm going to talk about bone graft materials for GBR. My name is Dr. Jingu Kim, Yonsei 9 Dental Office. First, bone graft materials. Before we talk about which one to use, let's have a look at how bone is formed. Briefly, you may have heard about this many times. Principle of GBR, cells, scaffolds, and signaling molecules are important, according to Samuel Lynch. What are these? As you know, to make, regulate, and obliterate bone, cells are necessary, and signaling molecules like BMP would be there. Scaffolds, such as bone graft materials, would exist, and they need appropriate environment, and they need to be protected by membrane, and a flat and sufficient blood supply is required. Over time, bone is regenerated. This is the principle of GBR. Cells, osteoblasts, osteoclasts, and osteocytes. Actually, osteocytes from long time ago, they said these were trapped in the cornelian canals and they did not have any particular functions, but a lot of studies have been conducted recently and they reveal the roles of osteocytes. They are mechanoreceptors. When bone is damaged or other problems occur when it is under pressure or changes that is felt by the mechanoreceptors, they affect other cells to initiate the bone remodeling. That was discovered recently, so osteocytes play very important roles. Cells, where do they come from? Osteoblasts would form bone, osteoid, bone matrix are formed, and ossification would occur. Osteoblasts would come from progenitor cells, and the source of those cells are mesenchymal stem cells, which change into osteoblasts. These cells include bone marrow, periosteum, endothelial cells, and pericytes. They migrate to become mesenchymal progenitor cells and differentiate into osteoblasts. These were discovered through many studies. The cycle of bone regeneration and formation. First, bone damage. Bone is damaged. Then the damaged part is cleaned by osteoclastic phase, and after the phase, cleansing occurs and other molecules migrate into the area to form bone, and osteogenic cells migrate into there, proliferate, and osteogenic phase occurs to make osteoid and bone matrix. So the first step is bone damage, and the healing occurs after that. So in the process, signaling molecules play an important role. The representative one is BMP molecules. So we heard about cytokine storm in relation to COVID-19, and that is happening here. So BMP molecules get involved in the communication between cells. There are so many various molecules involved, and the molecules, TGF, PDGF, regulate osteogenic cells to form and remodel bone. There are many different types of signaling molecules, and they work in different time period. Third factor is scaffold, bone graft materials. So when you build a building, you see these a lot. Scaffold means there are spaces provided by this frame. Cement is poured in and steel rebars are put in, and the cement is hardened to make a building. So they provide spaces to form bone, and the scaffold is the analogy. Graft materials, the types and characteristics of graft materials. And I will introduce some cases. There are various graft materials: autogenous bone, alloplast, xenograft, ideal graft material, new bone formation, anti-infection, no adverse effects, volume maintenance, clinical manageability, and low prices. These are the ideal conditions for the materials. Types of graft materials: autogenous bone, allogenic material, xenogenic, and alloplastic materials. Autogenous bone is not used for sinus surgery in my part, but sometimes it is used, not alone, but it is mixed with other xenograft or alloplast. Exostosis, tuberosity, ramus, and chin. From those sites, autogenous bone can be harvested. But as you know, they have good characteristics. Osteogenesis, bone formation, donor site mobility is the downside, fast resorption, and economic. So particulate bone is not used, but block autogenous bone is still used, and it is mixed with other bone graft materials. Allogenic bone, the selection criteria for allograft, which is quite widely used. These are the conditions: tissue bank, donor condition, cortical cancellous ratio, size of powder and chips. They have different physical characteristics. And the characteristics: osteoinduction by BMP, they are resorbed fast, as I said before. For maxillary sinus graft, demineralization would determine the physical property of the materials. Xenogenic bone, osteoconduction, bone formation. They don't form bone directly or have a BMP, but they occupy space so that bone can grow into the space, and it is resorbed very slowly. And they are from bovine or porcine, different characteristics, and they have reparative bone formation. BIOS catalog add image, and this is my biopsy after surgery. AOS was used. Both images look very similar, so they have very similar characteristics because they are bovine. Alloplastic bone. This is synthetic bone, pure beta-TCP, pure hydroxyapatite, but usually they are combined together in the form of BCP. The ratio determines resorption rate. Pure beta-TCP is resorbed too quickly, and pure HA is too slowly resorbed. A mechanism of bone regeneration: osteogenesis, conduction, and induction. Most bone materials have osteoconduction property, and bone can be formed by living cells, so only by autogenous bone, which is bone marrow. Osteoinduction, BMP. It was discovered by Dr. Urist when he transplanted bone protein to muscle, and the bone was formed there, and he realized the power of bone formation in the protein, and the molecule was BMP. And they have a lot of signaling molecules to form bone by osteoinduction. That was theory, but now let's turn to a case. The first case, GBR with allograft. In this patient, number 26 and 27, fracture occurred and extraction, followed by implant placement. the gaps were quite large because the patient was a young male, so allograft filled the gap and it was covered by collagen membrane. It was properly healed after 3 months, and the prosthesis was delivered. It was okay. At 3-year follow-up, allograft would resorb quite a lot, but the resorption rate is not big here because residual bone was sufficient on the buccal side. The bone was thick enough and the form was maintained and the graft materials did not disappear a lot, and very good results were achieved. So final prosthesis. Another case, in the anterior region, 2 posts fell off, so implant placement was done. The buccal bone is pretty good, so 2 implants were placed and the bone quality was okay. So allograft was put in inside. It was covered by membrane and sutured. Provisional teeth were used for 3 months and changed to the final prosthesis at 4 months. 5 months and 2-year follow-up, soft tissue healing, and everything looks okay. I thought it was okay, but at the time of prosthesis delivery, panorama and CT, there was enough gap and that was filled by bone, and post-op 1 year, the bone, labial bone is very thin, only 1 millimeter thick. So allograft is resorbed quite a lot, so gap filling is not good enough. That is not limited to allograft, but especially in the anterior region, allograft only used for GBR is not good enough. Clinical problems did not occur. Another way to use allograft is using a block bone. In this case, if you look at the photo, severe bone loss occurred, so they need to be extracted, and we had to wait for 3 months before placing implants. If you look at the thickness of the residual bone, it's not good enough to place implants. The concavity is severe. To place an implant, there's no bone to support it, so bone should be formed first with block bone. Rather than autogenous bone, a block allograft was used. A flap was raised and decortification was done for better blood supply. So allograft block was grafted and fixed with bone screws, and it was covered by membrane and sutured at 5 months after the bone is formed. So you may think allograft works really excellent. 10 mm bone width ensures placement of 4 mm implants, but 4 mm or more bone was observed at the time of placement, and the gap was filled. However, 2 to 3 months later, during the secondary surgery, you can see the exposure of implants. There was 3 mm or thicker bone before, but they all disappeared. So additional surgery and the rotated flap covering was done. The final prosthesis, if you follow up the CT, after operation, there was a lot of bone, but at 5 months, the bone was resorbed. So a lot of bone would be resorbed and the GBR should be added. And I do not do allograft only GBR in the anterior region. Allograft should be avoided for anterior region. That's my conclusion. So this is how it was finished. Let's look at GBR with a xenograft. In this patient, in the anterior region, the tooth developed a problem. It was extracted because of fracture, and the guided surgery was done to place an implant, and the GBR with the xenograft was conducted, and the final prosthesis. so it was used pretty well. In the gap, xenograft was put in, not outside the socket. Post of 2 years, enough labial bone thickness remained. That means xenograft, you look at the similar case before, allograft resulted in a lot of severe bone resorption, but xenograft is different. Let's look at another case. This tooth had a lot of bone loss, so palatal buccal bone loss is severe, so it was easily extracted, and you can see the image. After extraction, guided implant surgery was done, and the bone graft material, a lot of material on the buccal side, and collagen membrane covered the site, and it was sutured sufficiently with thin suture, and it was healed, and the provisional was changed into final prosthesis, and prosthetic delivery was completed. As you can see, in this patient, there was enough bone here, 5 millimeters or thicker, and after a year, still enough bone remained. So xenograft can be maintained for a long time compared to allograft. So in the anterior region, I do GBR with the xenograft, and the prosthesis was delivered. Here, porcine xenograft is used for GBR. The pig bone was used. Number 21 is resorbed. So guided surgery was conducted to place an implant, and after extraction we found severe bone loss, and epicotomy was recently done, so it looks like this. There's not much bone here. Fenestration is observed, and after placing an implant, gap filling would not be sufficient, so a huge volume of bone graft was done, and bone tacks were inserted at the apex. Sufficient GBR was conducted, provisional was delivered, and final prosthesis was delivered. It was finished quite well. Post of 1 year, 2 years, it is maintained. What about on CT? After operation, 5 millimeter or more bone is observed up to 6 weeks, but at 3 months there was a resorption, and at 1 year the residual bone volume is quite low. If you look at from the side, it is more obvious. A lot of resorption here. Post of 3 months to 1 year, a lot of resorption occurred. That is quite a lot of resorption for xenograft. Clinically, there is no issue, but you can see a lot of bone resorption here because it is porcine xenograft. You should be very careful if you use it in the anterior region. A huge volume was grafted, but it ended up as resorbed. So porcine is different from bovine bone. If you look at the x-ray, there's no big issues, but there can be problems down the road in the future. After extraction, we have to expect alveolar bone resorption. It is inevitable, and the resorption is more pronounced at the buccal than lingual side according to many papers. Selection of graft materials, defect type, resorption after extraction, these need to be considered, but most of all, as I said before, in the posterior region it doesn't make a big difference, but when we graft beyond the bone housing, xenograft should be used. In the anterior region, excessive amount should be used, and the bovine bone should be used if possible. And the reliable graft material manufacturer should be used with evidence-based articles. So my advice is you need to be careful in choosing new material on the market, which is not proven and has not been used for a long time by many users. Xenograft up to 6-year follow-up is hardly resolved. One more thing, this is a different story. Socket preservation. After extraction, you don't place implants or you will place implants later. Graft material is put in to prevent bone resorption. This is the ridge preservation procedure. Xenograft is here. Allograft. The conclusion is xenograft is resorbed least and spontaneous healing without grafting. Compared to it, xenograft maintains the site better. This is the result of biopsy using BIOS. BIOS collagen was used. Result of biopsy. The result is very good. This is the result of EOS collagen, which was launched not long ago. I received it and used it for the first time in this case. The result is not much different from before. Sometimes it achieves better results. So, I believe it is better to use bone material verified by our colleagues, by research papers. So that is the way to reduce failures. Thank you very much for your attention.